name is Nedim Junuzovic. I'm very glad to be here. Topic today is standards required for programmable electrical medical systems development. So in particular, this development is actually the focus of today's presentation. I'm really glad to have opportunities to see today's presentation, which are really engineering as supposed to be. This presentation is going to be like a bit of zoom out to see the whole environment around engineering activities you have, speaking in embedded systems. This topic, programmable electrical medical systems, is really wide, but I will today just try to have a little introduction around this topic for this time we have for this program. I'm quite positive when you have these parts with yourself that you feel that you don't have a doubt that these parts will fit together perfectly. Even more, they will function perfectly with all connections and everything. Sometimes they are produced by different manufacturers, but they will still fit and work perfectly. When you see doctor, you expect that this medical device will perform as intended, right? No problem, you go get your therapy, you feel better. If you go to cath lab or some operation room, you see many equipment around. Even this equipment, how many, like 10 different pieces of equipment, they're also most likely produced by different manufacturers. But as the whole, they work very nice, synchronized. Because manufacturers took care of immunity, emissions, and all of that, so they are like not affecting each other, and they perform as the whole. So my point of these couple of slides is just to bring awareness about standards. That's what we talk today. So we have to get standards in mind, get to have standards in practice in order to feel safe and be safe dealing with the medical devices. This is a definition of medical electrical equipment. Of course, that is a subcategory of wider definition of medical devices. Medical devices like coming from like single patch, syringe, gauze, whole way to the X-ray, MRI. So it's really wide definition and wide area. But devices we talk today for this presentation is medical electrical equipment, and this is definition. So electrical equipment having an applied part or transferring energy to and from the patient or detecting this energy transfer would be connected to one supply mains and defined by the manufacturer. So defined by the manufacturer, intended use defined by the manufacturer is like diagnosis, treatment, monitoring, or compensation for diseases and injuries. So all of that, when you see such equipment, you can call it medical electrical equipment. So with this kind of definition. Also, accessories that support intended use of this equipment comes in together with this equipment all together. So this definition is coming from this standard. I'm not sure if I may hit. So it's coming from this standard, IEC 60601-1. This is a general standard for the medical electrical equipment, and it provides general requirements for basic safety and essential performance. So today we will talk about this standard, because programmable electrical medical systems are defined with this standard. And actually, embedded systems, like to translate embedded systems, which is like a topic and purpose of this conference, is located in this standard, and in particular, you will see some chapter of this standard. Okay, I always like to visualize, you know, when it's difficult to introduce standards just by talking, but for the purpose of introduction of the standards and their purpose and how they work together and what is the interaction with these standards, there's a top level which is defined by this, for this medical electrical equipment, is defined by this general standard, IEC 601-1, the general standard. And it's applicable to all medical electrical equipment. The next level is horizontal standards, known as the collateral standards. They're also developed and available for all medical equipment as applicable. For example, EMC, I think we can agree it's pretty much for all medical electrical equipment applicable, regardless of the specific purpose of the device. Usability, alarms, pretty much applicable to all medical electrical equipment. If device you plan to use at home, definitely you will get standard for the home use. Or if device is intended to be used in some emergency situations, then you have standard for that. So this is horizontal kind of standards being available for the industry when dealing with medical devices. However, this is not all. Now we go down to our project. So we are developing certain medical devices. So we are required to dive in and get particular standard. And this particular standard is, of course, standard developed for one particular device with a specific function. So you can see, in the first place, that's a Series 6601-2, and then extension. For example, number 2, high-frequency surgery equipment. Then you have 4 defibrillators. Then you have a 10 nerve and muscle simulator, like TENS devices. So a lot of equipment. Speaking about our individual case, we have our project, our device, which we have to work on. So we are tasked or required to make some kind of portfolio of applicable standards among all of this. Again, I would like to visualize something like this. I made some sort of case study, even though it's not for some specific conformity assessment or for some specific regulatory framework, like you have CE mark or FDA compliance or other different regulatory frameworks. But this is the closest to CE mark for EU. You would have basic safety and electrical standard, like general standard. Then you have these horizontal standards. And then you would have this particular standard for nerves and muscle stimulators. So all of this together, you would take on your list portfolio of applicable standards. Okay, maybe it looks too much, but more is coming. So in order to get the full list and your project running perfectly and running as supposed to be, you have to extend not just standards for the product itself, but also for the standards required to have this project or development running in controlled environment. That means you need to have some sort of processes that controls your development work. Then you would have 13485 QMS. Then you would have risk management for the processes, but also for the product itself. You would have extended usability engineering standard, because this one, -1-6, is limited, and the 162.366 is also considering use in abnormal use. So it's kind of extended what we have with this particular standard. So make sure that you have full list. In this particular case, when we have nerves and muscle stimulators, that means you have output, you're delivering output energy to the patient. In that case, you have to control your output. Some software will need to fix that. So these softwares which have some safety functions are actually medical device softwares because of its function. And medical device software are covered by 62304 standard. So I'm not gonna go with a more extended list, but this is the first shot of the standards that you have to have in place in your portfolio when developing, in this case, I'm not gonna say simple, but let's say not high complexity medical device, medical electrical equipment, which is nerves and muscle stimulators. Okay. I made this slide only for inspiration. I know there's students, there's engineers, there's maybe not many of you already involved in medical devices, but I'm just giving you this as inspiration to see what all medical electrical equipment are they're in the field or developing still, and you have standards for this. So you have like therapy and operation room standards or medical equipment. Then you have monitoring diagnostic medical equipment, life supporting intensive care, imaging radiotherapy, beds. You see beds in the corner. This is not just a bed, this is like a hospital bed. So there's some functions also in the cardiovascular trick. So this is like not simple bed. So, but this is not full list. Full list is on a couple of pages if you want to go with the full list of the standards and available medical equipment today. I hope this will give you some like motivation to think about medical devices and the medical equipment, and it's really nice that we do have standards for this type of products. It's easier to work with. Okay, to comply with this topic and to this meetup, so we will talk about programmable electrical medical systems and their subsystems, which is named programmable electronic subsystems. And maybe you will notice here, PEMS is electrical and PES is electronic. This is actually the location in the standard when we really talk electronics by the terminology, even though electrical medical systems are considered like run on the electronics. Anyway, so this is just a cover page, just to give you orientation what is source for this presentation. So PEMS is covered by this standard, and this standard talks about many different things, like risk management, essential performance, service life, all about around the devices, but also in a clause 14, which was before individual standard, but now it's incorporated in General Standard 6601-1. In this clause, we talk about programmable electrical medical systems, how we develop and what are the requirements for development of these. By definition, medical electrical equipment consists of all parts to fulfill its intended purpose, and including mechanical parts, non-programmable components, and PEMS. So today, topic is PEMS. We will leave mechanical parts and non-programmable for some other occasion. Today we talk about PEMS. Programmable electrical medical system, by definition, maybe you can already see in the photo, is part of the ME equipment containing one or more subsystems that controls safety and essential performance functions of the equipment. So that's the purpose of PEMS, to drive and control safety and essential performance functions of the equipment. If that's not the case, you may have also some programmable part of electronics in your device, in your equipment, but does not control safety and essential performance functions. In that case, that's not in the scope of this definition. So we focus today, when we talk about PEMS, we focus on safety, essential performance functions, and of course, risk mitigation and risk control activities. As definitions say, PEMS contains one or more subsystems. Some less complex devices may have one subsystem, like one board and one controller unit, and that's all actually PEMS. But in some more complex devices, let's say MRIs and X-rays, they implement more subsystems for different purposes, for data analysis, for collection, for controlling outputs in some particular individual isolated manner, and so on. In this case, you have more subsystems, but all of them together is PEMS. Nice graphic is provided by the standard 6601, how this structure is actually organized between less complex and high complexity of medical and electrical equipment in terms of what is PEMS, what is PES, and so on. Okay, speaking of programmable electronic subsystems, what is that? Programmable PES is based on one or more central processing units, including software and its interfaces. Interfaces could be also software interfaces, but also electronics to make sure this whole system work together, components. The reason why we have this broken down into subsystems is actually, just as I explained, that you may have some complex medical equipment that you need to have isolated operations around for different purposes. Okay. Next couple of slides, we will talk about what standard require us when we're developing medical electrical equipment. I'm pretty much sure you were in contact and you have heard for some of these, but standards is really giving like the full scope of these requirements, which you would really need to consider in like development plan, put all together, sort out, and start performing development work accordingly. So in this case, we have a development life cycle. So we are required to implement life cycle model when developing PEMS. Life cycle model for PEMS is defined by the V-shape. V-shape is also defined in the standard, and it contains requirements, architecture design, subsystem architecture design, components integration and verification, validation activities, so really nicely sorted out so you can see in which stages you implement any of these activities, and they will be in most of cases, subsequential activities. Development activities and milestones, this is more like any other development project. You would have milestones, you would have all verification activities, you would implement the risk management system between milestones, and you would have documented requirements or documentation requirements. That means as soon as you start planning your development work, you should plan also what documentation you have to deliver, you have to create and deliver. From experience, it's impossible to wait end of the project when you have, let's say, all successful lab work, lab tests, and you say, okay, let's do the documentation. Almost impossible. Start at some early stage with this first draft of specification and all relevant documentation for the project, and as you're making progress with development, you will be making progress with documentation build. So that's like parallel work, because in medical devices, no option to close the project just with a physical device without related and relevant documentation, which describe the whole product. So this is, even though maybe does not sound like really, highlights, but documentation requirements is something you should look for at this stage. Okay, requirement specification. So the requirement specification is also key stage in development work. Because just hypothetically saying, if you missed to include some requirement in your portfolio, in your list, and you implement the product, you implement the project, then most likely when you get to the stage to test your product against some standard will show you that you are missing some requirements from this standard that you didn't consider at the beginning. That means you fail in the test because you are missing some requirements, of course, from this standard. So to avoid this fail or whatever, please put really good effort in compiling valid and comprehensive requirements document and requirement list for your product. Sometimes, of course, in startups and students and engineers who are getting now in this work, maybe didn't have opportunities to hear what are the requirements. But I just made 2 examples from the standard for pulse oximetry, and it says the following shall be considered primary operating function, where settings the operator adjustable controls, settings alarm limits, inactivating alarm signals, and switching between different modes. For example, when you read this switching between different modes, I'm pretty much sure you as an engineer right now trigger, oh, what do I need to do in my programming, in my electronics system, so the operator is able to switch the modes. Even though there's no values, like it's not measurable by value, it's quite straightforward task, and it's considered like requirement. It's easy to check out at the end when you implement specification and test. The other one has some measurable points, which says, there shall be indication that SPO2 or pulse rate data is not current when the data updated period is greater than 30 seconds. I was fast reading, but actually it says, there shall be indication. So you have to provide indication for the user in terms of, in cases of extended data collection period. So you as engineer right now, okay, what is the indication? Is it auditory? Is it like visual? Is it like what indication I have to provide, and how do I collect and ensure 30 seconds of data collection and so on. So with the infants, it's even less or shorter period. So when you read standards, on purpose I pulled this out from the standards for you to feel requirements in biomedical engineering, because you also have to learn about human physiological functions and all of that. So it's good to have standards, read standards, pull out everything what is applicable for your intended purpose of the device and for your PEMs, and start performing according to development plan. PEMS architecture, of course, architecture of the system has to correspond with the requirements document and requirements itself. It's a must, otherwise you will definitely miss some of requirements to be demonstrated and visible in the system, in the other side developed. Consider risk reduction activities. So when you building your architecture for medical electrical equipment, what does it mean? Like maybe you will implement some fail-safe functions, or you will implement some high integrity characteristics components, some really you can also consider use of the device and the system to make protection in case of foreseeable misuse. That's how standard calls. Like you have to think about what could go wrong with the normal use, but person does misuse the product and so on. So all of those protections would be your design work that you include in architecture and of course in design. PEMS design and implementation. It's of course depend on the product and the system. You can decompose into subsystems, each having design and test defined and documented. Document design environment data. What is design environment data? Maybe what was software development method that you have used? What is design and coding standards that you have implemented, for example? So simulation tools, what have you used? All specific components that you have implemented in the embedded system, what have you included there? So maybe some. So all of that is part of a documentation and all of these details have to be documented and visible in documentation of the product. And that's all, of course, subject for V&V. Implement problem resolution system. As you perform development, you may have problems with the inconsistent requirements, unambiguous requirements. You may have a problem with the coding errors, like PEMS is not operating correctly. So all of those issues can raise as you move on with the development. So for those cases, you would have some sort of system to identify problem, to make resolution. Often it's like refinement in design and redesign and so on. This is also important to mention, as I highlighted at the beginning, that embedded software, or I should state here PEMS/PES software, is actually medical device software and is covered by 62304 standard. This standard 62304 also provides you V-shape life cycle, and this software life cycle match this electrical basic safety standard cycle when developing also, let's say, electronics and hardware. So hardware and software teams have channels, open channels to communicate, no excuses. So life cycles are matching. And then, of course, this is just a workflow, which is part of the V-shape, just for you to see what software development is consistent of. Requirements, architecture, design, detail design, integration and testing. This integration and testing is really critical point. When we all do our work individually, then we have to put it all in one place and make sure this all work. Software classification, of course, this is like quite extended discussion, but it's just a simple said. You have class A, B, and C. What if software fails and no injuries? Let's say it's class A software, minor concern. Class B, if possible injuries, non-critical injuries, non-serious injuries happen, and in case of software failure, there's a possible of serious injuries or even death. That's like high-risk software classification. And depend on the software risk, this life cycle effort and robustness is actually driven. So for the less complex classification and software, of course, it's less robust development work and documentation and everything and testing, of course, self-explained. Okay, and the final V&V work. I have also opportunity today to see that you also discuss V&V work. That's really good. V&V work will be focused in requirements of basic safety, essential performance, and all risk control measures. And validation plan, of course, shall be focused and include basic safety and essential performance. Test results shall be documented, and we as a team have to ensure that no kind of that independency of the personnel being involved in V&V is ensured. No checking my own work. Okay, I think this is it. This is just to park some terminology in your minds as you perform the work. Nothing spectacular in terms of, because this is quite extensive topic. It will require the days of good talk. But today is just for you to have some orientation around this. PEMS/PAS is your embedded systems that you want to focus on when talking about medical and electrical equipment.
Thank you, Nedim, once again for the great presentation. And we now open new Q&A session. So please be free to raise your hand and ask question for Nedim.
Thank you, Nedim. We get a project. It's a medical project, and we need standards, right? How do I get those standards? Where they are? Is there marketplace, or how do I get them?
Yes. So actually, in this slide, I was showing you the level of the standards. I provided some logos of the publisher of the standards, like IEC, ISO standards, European norms, ANSI, American standards. There's different publisher of the standards. Some of them are developer of the standards. Some of those standards are all probably elevated from the national regulation to the international regulation. But the point is, when you get to specific project, you also have to know what is the market you're targeting. So for this market that you're targeting, you have to build your regulatory strategy. And then from this regulatory requirements for this market, you pull out applicable standard list. Maybe not all standards are same for the Europe and for the Japan or US. So you would go into their national regulation and pull out applicable requirements and harmonize. In EU, we have a CE marking, we have MDR regulation and IVDR, and they bring together the standard list which are applicable if you want to meet this national regulation, basically to get CE marking.
And they are cheap, right?
Yes, especially if you have this list, like maybe 10 standards, 15 standards, you have to get them all individually.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, one question from my side. So basically, when you are designing medical device for different markets, do you have issue with standards that are conflicting, between different markets? So for example, main question is like, can you create one device for all the markets? Is that possible, or?
There's an opportunity when you develop your product. In the first place, definitely you need to know which markets you are targeting in the planning phase, early beginning, because it's really difficult when you have finished product to start adding, okay, EMCs, well, let's reduce EMC now, or, some outputs and so on. So it's preferred, and it's all, I'm not going to say must, but give all your effort to plan your regulatory requirements, your market requirements at the early stage, just in order to get the full requirements list. As soon as you get full requirements list, and as soon as you get all these applicable standards in this requirement list, then it's just traditional development. You have requirements, and then you start implementing these limitations, let's call it that. So in the end, you will get design ready for compliance testing in those defined markets. And when you get to lab, you also ask in the safety lab and EMC, like, give me the national differences. Okay, I'm testing for EU, but please test additionally for Canada or Australia or US. So that's additional subset, maybe additional subset of the requirements and the standards.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Hello. So I have one question. So when we have a medical device, so we do the risk assessment, risk management, and basically we do assessment of the hardware in this case on one project that I worked on. So everything that can go wrong. And for example, if we have a case, let's say that we have one chip and the voltage on that chip normally, or in like the possibility for it to go above the maximum value which is possible is under the limits of that chip. So this is the normal condition. But do we need to test and verify that, or we can argue that this cannot happen, so that we don't need to conduct any test which can damage the chip, for example, if you understand what I mean? So in a case that in a risk assessment, we say that we have 0.01% probability that this will happen. Do we need to, because it's at some point we need to add some additional like protection to reduce the risk. But what are those limits that we need to basically achieve in these cases?
Yeah. I mean, in the first place, with your design and with your components that you have planned and designed and included, your first objective is to pass standard requirements, meaning acceptance criteria in independent lab. So if you cannot pass that test, so your design is not sustainable. So you have to go back and make sure that your components and everything that you have included will pass that test. So, but if you're declaring more strict conditions than test is giving, that's something else. But the regulatory, you have to finish, you have to comply with the tests, but also you have to comply with what you have promised. Otherwise, that's also not okay. So, if you promise something, but you cannot achieve that level of reliability, and there's no other options to reduce the risk by, there's no options to design further, or there's no options to include more high integrity components or something, then also you have to analyze in the risk management what is the cause of the failure and the consequences.
So basically, if the risk is low, we can like mitigate it because it's not really possible, and the damage especially for a human, is not that big. So we can say, okay, this is not that big of an issue. Like if, for example, we have increase of the voltage and this just damages the equipment but doesn't harm the human, we can say this is acceptable for us and the regulatory will accept it.
Well, the best I can tell you, you have to deal with your risk control activities as further as, you know, as further as possible, and then you will see what is the remaining risks. Then you evaluate remaining risks, and then you will see what is the behavior of your product with these remaining risks, and of course at that point you will make decision, is this something we can go with or not. So regulatory have to comply, but also what you have promised, you have to analyze and do all your utmost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.